Yeah. So I'm going to just start out with a little story. So when you go through the process of submitting what you want to speak on for SAINTCON or any other conference, I had submitted this topic of the data dilemma, and a couple of weeks after it got accepted, I got contacted by another conference that happens down in Phoenix next month. And they said, hey, we'd really like you to come down and speak. And you can kind of choose your topic. And I said, well, I'm speaking at SAINTCON in October, and I could just do that again if you want. And they said, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's called the data dilemma, and it's around, protecting data. And there was kind of a silence. And I thought, oh shit. And he said, yeah, nobody likes to hear about data. And then I really thought, oh shit, I can't change it now. I already submitted it. And anyway, so I said, let me send you the outline for what I'm talking about. And you guys can look it over. And if you want me to speak on something else, that's okay. I'm willing to put something else together. And so I sent it over to him, and I still haven't heard back from him. So I hope that doesn't speak to how people think about data, and talking about data. But thank you for being here. I appreciate it. But to me, this is a very important shift that we're seeing from ransomware into some other tactics that are being used. Let me first of all introduce myself a little bit. So I lead the information security and compliance teams for Sportsman's Warehouse. I've been with Sportsman's Warehouse for a little over 21 years. So I've been there a long time, seen a lot of different things, and definitely grown up in cybersecurity. 21 years ago, I remember going through our very first audit, security audit, and we had two questions. Do you have a firewall? And do you have antivirus? That was the extent of our assessment. And it was part of a bigger assessment, risk assessment. But, things have come a long way since then. And so my first job was, how many of you guys remember Convergys, or how many people worked at Convergys, right? A lot of people went through that place. I was on the AT&T account, provisioning T1 lines. I taught Cisco CCNA, CCMP tracks for a couple of years, along with PIX firewall, and that was really my introduction into security. One thing that I normally tell people is I kind of stumbled into security. Some of us are born to do security, early. There's a passion there. There's a drive. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but I definitely kind of grew into security rather than this is what I wanted to do. And then a little bit about myself. I have 4 kids, 2 dogs, 2 grandkids, 1 wife. I love the outdoors. I love reading. And I love sports, particularly college football and European soccer. So that's a little bit about myself. So I do want to cover really quickly CIA, because we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but especially as it pertains to securing data. The CIA triad, again, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are our focuses as security practitioners and security leaders, is to make sure that we're covering these 3 things, right? We're keeping data confidential. We are verifying, validating the integrity of data. And then we are also making sure that data and systems are available for our end users, right? So those three things are where our focus are. All right, let's talk about this shift. So, right, dear customer, we haven't had a data breach involving your personal data yet, but it's just a matter of time. So we're notifying you now, right? Can anybody kind of sympathize with this, empathize? Yes. I mean, that's kind of what the world we live in now, right? So does this statistic surprise anybody? In 2023, there was a decrease in ransomware attacks of 11.5%. Is that surprising to anyone? Yeah, it was to me as well, right? You know, that's all we've heard for the last 5-10 years as ransomware, right? And all of a sudden we have a drop. Well, why? Why is that? At the same time in 2023, and this is from the IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence report, there was an increase in data theft and leak incidents. Okay. So we're starting to see this little bit of a shift of, okay, we're not going to necessarily encrypt. We're just going to steal data. Right? Some more numbers. There's an upsurge in the use of info stealers, 266% increase in 2023. Right? Again, why? What is driving this shift? Some other indicators with CrowdStrike Global Threat Report, 76% increase in the number of victims named on BGH, right, and dedicated leak sites between 2022 and 2023, right? We're seeing more data for sale out there on these sites. Okay. Microsoft Digital Defense Report. Since November of 2022, we've observed a doubling of potential data exfiltration instances. Okay. And then the Dillon state of ransomware. In the past year, ransomware adopted a more insidious approach with greater emphasis on data exfiltration and increased stealth. Cyber criminals are strategically extracting sensitive data without necessarily delivering that encrypted payload. Okay. Why is this? Okay. Can anybody think of why this might be happening? Some numbers. The top data breaches so far of 2024. 2.7 billion customer records out of one data breach. We're just shy of 350 million people just in the United States, right? How many of you think that your data is not out there? Right? It's out there. It's been taken. It's gone. Right? So of these, as we look at them, only one of the 5 involved ransomware. The rest of them were all just data theft. They took it and they were gone. Okay? So this is not rhetorical. Any thoughts on why this is happening? Yes.
They will get a face, so doesn't work out right, and then they do a he doesn't get some money.
Okay.
People like okay, stop when they're and they say, I got your data.
Yeah, great point. Right. Once it's gone, right? Yep. Okay.
Okay, let's get in. My name fits their environment.
Right.
So just steal it and then go.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
If it's happening, it works.
It does. Yeah, it does. And that is the motivation for this is money, right? What you were going to say?
Easier to attack someone's personal account that is still safe in you. One place.
Okay.
It's case.
Right.
So if I'm making your doctor and send you neighbors, what?
Okay.
Everybody just has you.
Yeah. Right. Okay, good. Yes.
leverage.
Okay. Talk to me about that.
So talk about data. I think the president was way to preventing access and junk data. I mean, verifying, having the reputation, well, you got
Okay.
all time. What?
All right. Anybody else? Yes.
Make it small, like, till it's probably to.
Okay. Yes.
Like,
Okay. I love that one. Right. I'm going to come back to the previous. Is it easier to steal data than to encrypt data? I don't think so. Right. I don't think so. Because both of them, you have to be in the environment, right? You have to have your foothold there. You probably have to have permissions to the data, one way or the other. What were you going to say?
just back to the
Okay.
encrypting data, you have to go back. That's whether or not
Okay.
if you're stealing, if you steal, it's that.
And I think that goes into why we're seeing some shift, right? Okay. Anybody, was there another hand over here? Yes.
I was going to say, if you reach somebody and you match it, they know it's which. If you just go and steal data, they'll know that you can go back and you bought it, still out. They'll still promise you.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Yeah, maybe you grab a little bit and then you grab a little bit more. Yeah, keep adding on that. Yes.
That's like, if you rent, what rents in here, and you're someone who's paid, you make not pay.
Okay.
You steal the data, and you're getting said, no way I paid. You still but that's too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Great point. Anything else? Yes.
No, let's start a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, this is a discussion. This is not right or wrong, right?
If you get threat, if you threat something, if that's not kicking off a lot, it's just things about nature and teaching all enough.
Yep.
You're in the environment, you're just slowly like, other things like that, filling it. You can get lost stuff, then.
Right.
Easier is like telling, get like the.
Yeah. Easy is a relative term, right? Maybe a push of the button is easier than, exfiltrating all this data, but what do you do with it, right? Okay. Excellent answers. In fact, I think that covers almost everything here, right? Money is always and will always be the number one reason people are doing this, right? But why the shift from ransomware to data theft? Okay. We are getting better at recovering from ransomware, right? Where we've come in the last 5 years even is enormous, right? So a lot of companies are choosing to recover rather than to pay, right? We're better at backups. We're better at, stopping that detonation to begin with. We're better at rolling things back, right? So much of our security tooling has been centered around preventing or recovering from ransomware for the last 5 to 10 years that we've gotten pretty good at it, right? But again, when your data is gone, it is gone. You are not getting it back, right? So I think that speaks a lot to why the shift, right? They are more likely to get paid when there's data theft involved versus just a ransomware attack. Okay. All right. Also, somebody mentioned this, but compliance with state and federal regulations add additional pressure to pay. Why is that? What's changed recently in this regard? Yes.
Within the U.S. and other regions, the proliferation of cyber financing laws has increased a lot of them.
Yeah.
So it brings into the situation where you
have the illusion of control of that data very simply to organization because it might be like a mint or explosive requirement.
Yeah.
Even if it's impact on your
Right. Does anybody know off the top of your head, the SEC, right, passed some laws that we require if you are a publicly traded company, how much time do you have to disclose a data breach where data is stolen? 48 hours. Most of us are even trying to figure out what happened at that point, right? But now we have this requirement that we have to do an 8K and we need to disclose what happened, what we know at that point, within 48 hours of us finding out that it happened. That's crazy to have to do that, right? But the damage to your publicly traded company is enormous, right? We may not even know if it's a material breach or not, right? Is it big enough to really impact us financially to where we have to do it? Well, we probably don't even know that yet. Okay. All right. So, and then of course the loss of competitive edge in the org's market, right? Loss of market share and loss of customer trust is huge here. Okay. All right. Let's talk about really quickly. Just I've got a short piece on this on what the top 8 vulnerabilities were that led to data theft. Sorry. Weaker stolen credentials, backdoor and application vulnerabilities. I think that would also include, some of our attacks on, software, supply chain attack type stuff as well, right? Malware, social engineering, too many permissions, insider threats, improper configuration of APIs, and DNS attacks. Those were the top 8. Any surprises there? Anything that you think should have been on there or would think that would be on there? All right. Okay, combating extortion. I love this slide, right? The daydreams of cat herders, right? At least I'm not responsible for a data protection project, right? Protecting data is really hard. It really is. And let's talk about why, okay? This is something that we mapped out a while ago. As I said, I worked for Sportsman's Warehouse. This has been a couple of years ago. But we mapped out when we take an order online from a customer, where does all that data end up? Right? Where does it all go? How many systems does it touch? Okay? And this is what we mapped out. I mean, this is kind of a spaghetti bowl, isn't it? To try to understand where all of that data flows to. Not only within our environment, but also all of our vendors that we interface with as well. Okay? And it's hard to keep track of that. And as things change, do we make sure that we're mapping that out as well? Right? So understanding, in this case, structured data, right? Or database data, right? Understanding where that is can be confusing sometimes and hard to keep track of. I'm going to talk a little bit more about, I live in Sportsman's Warehouse world. We sell firearms, right? So when a firearm, this actually kind of surprised me when I first learned about it, but there is no national database that tells the government who owns or who purchased firearms. It doesn't exist. In fact, it's illegal for them to have that. Okay, what's that? Yeah. Okay. This process seems to indicate that is true. So when somebody purchases a firearm, how many of you guys have purchased a firearm, right? Okay, so most of us have at some point, right? There's a long form called a 4473 form that you have to fill out. And it has about every piece of data about you that you could possibly think of on that form, right? So what happens is if a firearm is used in a crime or for whatever reason, what the government has to do is they have to contact, if they recover that firearm, they have to go to the manufacturer of the firearm and say, who did you guys sell this to? Right? Not the individual, but the company. Okay? So let's say Browning, right? Browning then replies back to it's usually the ATF, it could be the FBI, it could be local law enforcement, right? But they'll reply back and say, we sold that firearm to Sportsman's Warehouse. They will then reach out to a Sportsman's Warehouse compliance team and say, okay, can you give us the individual who purchased this firearm, right? And then we respond back to them. But there is no database out there that contains all of that information. It has to go through this process to find out, who owns that firearm. So let's talk a little bit about that process and something that we found as we started looking at this. So they recover the firearm. ATF reaches out and says, Browning, who did you sell this to? It went to Sportsman's Warehouse. Sportsman's Warehouse picked it up. And so they will contact us. And as I said, that goes to our compliance team. Okay. The compliance team will then pull that form that was filled out, and there's a separate form with not as much information on it, tracking by the serial number, that they will fill that out and reply back to the ATF, FBI, local law enforcement, whoever it is, right? What we found, though, is that when they were filling out that form and responding back to the ATF, we'll say, they also were copying about 20 people on that email, right? Our entire compliance team. And I'm sure this grew over, 15 years of this process in place and more people. So every time we sent that, we were creating 15 to 20 copies of this form that had sensitive data on it, right? Now, was this a problem with our compliance team? Yeah, it's the process, right? They were just trying to get their jobs done, right? They didn't stop to think, oh, this probably isn't a good idea, right? They were just trying to get their jobs done. That's all they were doing. But in the process, they were creating, copies and copies and copies of this data that shouldn't have been out there. Okay. So we've had to address this and change the whole process, but it was never their fault, right? They're just doing their jobs. They're just trying to get their jobs done. Okay. All right. So structured data, unstructured data, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. 4 key strategies that we'll talk about: data discovery and classification, risk-based approach, defense in depth, and threat modeling. All right, I do like this quote. Warren Buffett: risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Okay? And I think that's true. No matter what the risk is that we're talking about, if we don't understand what we're doing, there is risk involved. Okay? All right, so risk-based approach to cybersecurity. Why do we do that? Number one, it allows us to align with our company objectives, okay? I was just talking about this earlier with somebody. Thinking back on my career as we grew our cybersecurity program, and I think a lot of people are in this same boat. When PCI came along, it made us start getting better at security, right? We take credit cards. Back in the day, there was a lot of credit card theft in data breaches. That's changed because, pretty much nobody's storing credit cards themselves anymore. But it made us change, right? So PCI really pushed forward for us at Sportsman's Warehouse our security program. And then came along Sarbanes-Oxley, right? And that made us even get better in certain areas, right? But should we run a compliance program a security program based off compliance? No, why?
Security,
They are, yep. They definitely overlap, right? Any other thoughts out there? Yes.
risk,
Okay, I like that, right? And it's very focused on singular goals as well, right? And is it even the most important thing to us? Maybe not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? Any other thoughts? Yes.
Compliance frameworks tend to treat all types of risks as being relatively equitable, and that doesn't apply to every.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah, compliance is not a great way to run a security program. So why a risk-based approach? Okay. Again, some advantages. It shifts from that reactive to a more of a proactive approach to security. Okay. It helps us allocate resources more strategically, and we'll talk about that as well. Develop tailored security measures, enhance situational awareness, improve compliance, and align with security frameworks, right? Blockers. It can be very difficult to measure risk, right? In fact, it usually is difficult. I belong to a group of security leaders that we have an active Slack channel. And a couple of months ago, I threw out the question, hey, how are you guys measuring risk, right? Some of them came back and said, fair. One guy said, hey, there's this great book called How to Measure Risk in Cybersecurity. How to measure anything in cybersecurity is what it's called. So I read that book or listened to it. I did all these things, but every person that came back still said, there's still kind of a gut feel on this as well, right? And I don't know that it has to be that way, but I think that's where we get to a lot of times with risk is kind of, what feels right as far as where our biggest risks are. Okay. It can be very difficult to get buy-in from the business on this as well, because really risk shouldn't be run by IT. Risk should be run by the company, right? Or by the business. And everybody should be aligning with those same risks. Resistance to change. Sorry, I'm going to get some water here. Yeah, and then limited resources and focus on compliance. Oops. Aligning with business objectives. So let's say that these three things on the left are business objectives for the year, okay? So increase customer lifetime value, increase revenue over the prior year, and increase brand value. Those are our company's objectives. How do we align security with those objectives? Any thoughts? Because that's what we should be doing in security, right? Our company's not in business to be secure. They're in business to make money, or our organization, right? So we should be aligning our security program with the goals of the business, right? And if we're not, we're doing things wrong. Okay? So when we look at this, how do we align with those goals? Any thoughts there? Yes. Okay. Let's talk about each of those. Confidentiality. How do any one of those fail if we fail to keep customers' data private and secure?
Brent,
Yeah, absolutely. Is that going to hurt all three of those? It will, won't it? Right? How about the integrity? Like, my best example is Sarbanes-Oxley, right? If we're a private company, we have to validate what we are telling Wall Street in our financials is good information, right? The data has integrity. It's good data, right? So if we fail to do that and we get a material weakness, which is kind of the top of the pyramid on the worst thing that could happen when a SOX audit goes on, is that going to impact these things? Of course it will, right? And then availability. If our data or our systems are not available, is it going to impact these things, right? So we as security practitioners and leaders should be aligning with whatever those goals are. That should be our focus. Okay. All right. So aligning with the security framework. This one I happen to use is the CIS 18 NIST. You can do it with any of these, right? But as we measure risk and then we look at where we are, so the red is our security maturity. Like, where are we in our progress, to be able to have a great security program? We're going to be better in some areas than we are in others. But also, where do the risks exist? And where we see those highs are those big differences in the two. So in this particular one, data protection, continuous vulnerability management, and data recovery. That's where our biggest gaps are, right? That is where we should be focused on our security, because that's where the greatest risk is with the lowest amount of security. Does this make sense? Okay. All right. So allocating resources strategically, right? How many of us are in this boat? What we need is a bunch of people and a bunch of money to be secure, right? What we get is different, right? Is there anybody here that has an unlimited budget that can go buy and hire whoever you want? Yeah, I didn't think so, right? It just doesn't exist. And maybe it shouldn't exist, right? In fact, there is no maybe. It shouldn't exist. We can't do that. Again, we're in the business of making money or running a city or, whatever it is that you guys do for your organization. We're not in the business of being secure. Okay? All right. So when we do that, what we kind of have to do is pick out what our crown jewels are, right? What is it that we are trying to protect? Okay? And that's going to be different for every one of us, but we need to understand what that is. Like, where are the threats? Where is the risk in our organization? Because it's different for every one of us. Okay? So as we allocate resources, we should end up with, some things we have to have a lot of security around, and other things we don't have to spend all the money and the resources on. So part of our jobs is to making sure that those resources are allocated where they should be. Okay? Because we cannot protect everything equally. There just isn't enough money and resources to do it. All right, data discovery and classification. So, first of all, this gives us is it possible to, let's say that our crown jewels are, some set of data that we have, right? Is it possible to defend or to protect that data if we don't know where it is? Right? In my two examples I gave before, we don't know where all of our data is. So unless we do, we've got to make, there's no way to protect it if we don't know where it is, okay? Efficiency of data, accuracy, I don't want to read through all of these, but another thing that we get, somebody brought up, I think over here, privacy, right? DSRs, when we get a request to delete a customer's data, do we really know where that data is to be able to fulfill that request? Okay, we should. Again, some of the same blockers, it can be very difficult. We can get pushback from the business side of things as well. All right, really quickly, it is important to define when we're talking about data discovery and classification, structured versus unstructured data, right? Structured data is highly organized and easily searchable data, right? That usually exists or lives in a database. Examples are dates, names, addresses, credit card numbers, product SKUs, all of that kind of things, right? This is structured data, right? It's ideal for applications like inventory control, CRM systems, and ERP systems, right? Okay. Unstructured data. Now, unstructured data can be much more difficult. Data that lacks predefined format. This could be PDFs, it could be documents, it could be whatever out there, right? Video, whatever. So, a lot of times structured data is more difficult than, unstructured data is more difficult than structured data because it's harder to search, right? It's harder to find where it is. Okay. But we need to make sure that we focus on both. I'm a little bit worried we're going to get short on time here, so I'm going to kind of skip through some of this. So, as far as data discovery, again, just focus on both of those. Don't do one without the other. They are both very important. Once we understand where our data is, then that's when we can start protecting it and securing it the way that it should be. Okay. All right, data classification. This is simply going through the process of defining what data is restricted, what's prohibitive or sensitive. So we're giving it different levels of classification, right? And again, that top level should be, again, where we're focusing most of our security. That highly secure or highly sensitive data. Okay. All right. Threat modeling. This goes to kind of back to that spaghetti bowl that I saw. One thing that we should do is once we understand where that data is, we should go through every one of those flows and everywhere that data is stored and make sure that it is encrypted in transit and make sure that it is encrypted at rest, right? So threat modeling is going through and identifying and then making sure that we do fix the issues once we find out where they are. Okay. Yeah, is it encrypted? And have we remediated? Okay. All right. Earlier this year in August, I went to London for the first time, right? And the real purpose we went is my wife and daughter went to see Taylor Swift. And I didn't go to Taylor Swift. I went and visited the Tower of London instead, which I got the better of the deal, I still feel. How many of you been to the Tower of London before? Yeah, I love history, and it was awesome. I could have spent 3 or 4 days in that place, right? But, as I'm looking at that, and I'm not the first one to make this, this correlation of defense in depth, right? But as you look at these old castles, right, or these old strongholds, the way they built security was very much in depth, right? They had multiple layers of securing their crown jewels, right? And it was no different in the Tower of London, right? You get over there and there's multiple layers, and to finally get into the crown jewels, there's all kinds of security around that. And it was fascinating to me. Okay. In fact, I think they have, as far as they have hidden CCTV cameras, they have bomb-proof glass around that. You have the beef eaters, you have other security, you have undercover security. So they've got all these different layers of security around protecting those crown jewels, right? And it's no different for us, okay? This one, I hope this goes over well. So let's say that we have a guy, and his name is Gustavo, okay? And let's say that he wants to start, or he has this fabulous chicken recipe, okay? And it's Los Pollos Hermanos, right? Is anybody following this yet? Okay, all right. So let's say that he has this company, and he has the best chicken in the world, right? It's like a drug, okay? And he wants to protect that information, that he doesn't, that doesn't get out. So there is a hacker gang out there. All right, there we go. All right, okay. All right, there's a hacker gang out there that, if you're not following, this is from Breaking Bad, right? That is trying to get to his secret recipe, okay? So building this out, he is going to do multiple layers of security, okay? Data security, first level, okay? Making sure that we're backing up our data, making sure that we are, we know who's in and out of that data, making sure that we're doing DLP on the data, making sure that we're encrypting the data, right? Application security, again, we have WAF, we have making sure that we're monitoring the data, we're looking at the databases, endpoint security, network security, and then perimeter security, right? This is how we should build defense in depth, okay? All right, let's talk a little bit about penetration testing as we test this defense in depth, okay? How many of you, well, let me tell you this. So the first 5 years of me having a third party do a penetration test, their sole objective was to get AD admin access, right? Have any of you been through those to where that's what they do, and as soon as they're done, they're like, oh, we got AD admin access, we're done, right? We have the keys to the kingdom. And to a point, that is correct, right? It's a big deal, but it's not everything, and you should not stop there, right? You should give them defined objectives. I see my buddy Blake back here who works for HackerOne. I had them do ours this year, and they did a fantastic job. I gave them objectives of certain data that I wanted them to go after and find in our environment. And I knew it was there. I knew that we had some holes. And I wanted to see if they, like a hacker that would get into us, would be able to find that and expose those. And they were able to do it. And that went a long way for me to taking that to, management, senior management, and saying, hey, this happened during the pen test. We have got to close this hole, right? They were able to get to our data. Okay. What's that? You're right. We got to fix it, right? My team can attest that that's all we've been working on for the last bit is trying to get that stuff fixed, right? So, so make sure that you're testing the right things. Don't end it at just, the high level stuff. Okay. David, anybody here from MacQ? All right. David Glaude, who's the CISO at MacQ. introduced me to this idea of shields up and shields down, right? When we are doing penetration testing, should we always start them at that perimeter security and say, see if you can get to the crown jewels? No, right? Because if they can't get through that first level, we're not testing anything beyond that, right? We should test that perimeter level, but we should get all the way down to the data access level as well, right? So when he said shields up or shields down, sometimes we should be taking down some of our shields so they can get to those other layers and test those layers as well. Otherwise, they never get tested, okay? And I will hold true to this forever, but 0 findings in your pen test usually says a lot more about your pen tester than it does about your security program, right? Because nobody is 100% secure. Nobody has everything 100% patched, right? Nobody has every hole closed, okay? So don't expect a clean report if you have really good pen testers, okay? You should get better every year. You should close those holes that they do find, but there will be more next year, okay? All right, we talked a little bit about this already. Information security is a major priority at this company. We've done a lot of stupid things we'd like to keep secret, right? I think a lot of us can empathize with this a little bit, right? We've all done stupid things. Not only the company, but we've done stupid things as well, right? Okay. So, data breach laws. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Do you know what? You were right. I said 48 hours. It's 4 days from material breach, right? That's how long we have to disclose. And again, it's not enough time really to understand what data was taken, what happened, and everything else. So I know there's a lot of, talk about this, that this is unrealistic, that we might be, giving bad information even in that 8K if we haven't figured out quite yet what's happened, okay? FTC has a breach notification rule for any HIPAA violations or any HIPAA information that's been taken. We have to affect the individuals. We have to notify the affected businesses. Does anyone here have any idea of what the cost of a single record of being stolen costs a company? One record, right? We saw 1.2 billion records in one of the large breaches, right? One record. Any guesses?
What's that?
5 cents.
No.
$8. Start thinking about, okay, we have to pay for them to get credit protection now because they stole data. We have to think about what the impact to our stock is going to be, right? We've got to think of all these things. So is that number going up?
Yeah.
Any guesses? Keep going up. How much? Per record.
$200. Now,
Per record.
you should
Okay. Man, we are all over the place here.
go to see it.
It might. It could fluctuate from that. But in the cost of a data breach report that came out in 2024 for 2023, the cost of one record was $173. Okay? But you think about that 1 million records stolen. Will that put your company out of business? It could. Right? And that's really a small breach anymore. Right? The other one that came out of that was, there was one other one. I'm trying to think of who did it. But they said 165, but that's irrelevant at that point. Okay. So yeah, it's very expensive for companies. Okay. And somebody brought up the point that are these laws that we're now held to, are the bad guys exploiting this? How?
There have been instances where after, well, Brent was born of organization to a living for a time that they don't pay the rent.
Absolutely.
One foot the rent.
Yep. And they're putting a lot of pressure on the company to pay, right? At some point, sometimes we don't know if it's material that we have to report it or not, right? We're still trying to figure that out. And they're like, hey, you've got, till tomorrow at noon to either tell the SEC that this has happened or we're going to tell them. Right? So they are using it to exploit and get paid for this. Okay. All right. Finally, and this is going to be good. So, some of you guys are old enough to remember the days of Wayne Gretzky. If you're not, I think at least know who he was, right? He has a great quote that I really like. I skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it has been. And I think that is a great motto for us as cybersecurity practitioners. We have to be looking ahead, right? We can't skate to where the puck was. We've got to go to where it's going. Okay? All right. So what can you do? Again, understand your risk. Know where your company's or your organization's risk is. Understand that. Consider all three phases of CIA as you look at that. Understand where your data lives. Use those tooling, the tooling that we talked about. Consider both the structured and unstructured data equally, and then implement best practices. Make sure that you are following a framework. I've worked and worked with several different frameworks. I think they're all good. They all usually map to each other. So make sure that you're following a framework. Implement best practices. So we already said that. And then finally, just stay vigilant. Work hard. Be awesome. Have fun. Okay? We work in a really cool industry. It's something that most of us are passionate about and we care about. We're all in this together. Every one of us. Any communities you can join to bounce ideas off of each other. What are you guys doing? How are you addressing this issue? It's a great thing to do. And usually we're really good about sharing those ideas, right? All right. So lastly, if any of you are doing the virtual escape room for the leadership community, there's just the information. So from this session, you can get this session hint code to get help with it. I see data people, so you can go to the leadership community and redeem that if you're getting stuck in that virtual escape room. So that's all I've got. Thanks, everybody. Any final questions, comments? Yes.
What do you feel about, I think it's kind of a particular topic I've seen recently, conversation about incorporating likelihood risk calculation, likelihood to potentially being an unknown.
Yeah. That's where it gets into some really crazy statistics and stuff like that. I think it has to be part of it. And most good risk-based approaches do include that in there. So yes, and the answer to your question is absolutely. Any others? All right. Thanks, everybody.